Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go through the monthly new residential construction report. This is also known as the housing starts and building permits. It's one of the most important reports in regards to not just real estate but the overall economy. The two are very connected. For example, when we go into an expansion in the economy, incomes go up, which causes people to buy more housing, and so more housing gets built. But as incomes are going up and the economy is expanding, interest rates start to go up as well, which kind of puts a lid on the increase in housing activity. So we often see the housing market peak before the economy does. In contrast, when we go into a recession, incomes go down and housing demand drops. That leads to a decrease in housing construction. But at the same time, when we go into a recession, interest rates drop. So that helps alleviate some of the decreased demand for housing. And in other words, housing kind of bottoms out before the economy does. So it's a very good indicator to track changes in the economy. We might say it's a leading indicator. So this report is the most recent, March 18th, 2020. And it's broken down into building permits, housing starts, and housing completions. And here we've got the data, but it also shows the timeline and the changes in permits, starts, and completion. Just to simplify, permits is where somebody applies to construct new residential housing. New residential housing would include single-family homes. It would include apartment buildings, high-rises, any dwelling where people are going to reside, either by purchasing the unit to live in or by renting it out to somebody else. It does not include hotels or office buildings or anything like that. Housing starts is where the ground has actually been broken, meaning that they've begun the process of laying the foundation for the property. That's the first phase of construction, is pouring that foundation. And then housing completions is where the house is now done and is ready to be put on the market. There's actually 5 tables we're going to look at. Table 1 is about permits. So this gives us the numbers of permits that were issued in the U.S. And in various regions of the U.S. So for example, if we go down here, we've got 2019 monthly data, but let's go ahead and go to 2020 January, and you'll see that for the U.S. as a whole, there was 1,550, but these are in thousands of units, so we had 3 zeros, so that's 1,550,000 annualized units permitted. That essentially means that in the U.S. as a whole, there were 1,550,000 units authorized to be developed. Doesn't mean they will be, but the permit was issued. Then you break it down, 1 unit, which would be single-family homes, 987,000, and then 2 to 4 units, which would typically be apartment buildings or townhomes, and then 5 or more units, which would typically be apartment buildings or high-rises. Now understand that when we say 5 or more, each individual apartment is counted as a unit. So a high-rise that has, let's say, 25 units in the building would count as 25. Even though it's 1 building, it counts per residence. Same thing for 2 to 4 units. A 4-unit apartment complex would count as 4 units here. The other thing to note is that these are annualized figures, which means that they've been multiplied by 12 because we're looking at monthly data. So if you actually wanted to know the number of permits issued in the U.S. in January, you would take this number and you would divide it by 12. If I do that, let me see if I get 129,000. So there were 129,000 homes actually permitted for development in the U.S. in January. All right, let's take a look at the second table. This one shows us units that have been permitted but not yet started by the end of the period. So for example, in January 2020, there were 171,000 units that had permits but had not yet started. you'll note that in this report, we don't have annualized data. So that's the actual number, 171,000 in January that had been permitted but not yet started. Scroll down a little further. Let's now take a look at Table 3. This one tells us units that have been started. This is probably the most important part of the report because it means that construction has begun, which translates into economic activity. Housing is a big part of the economy. About 5% of GDP is related to housing construction, but over 20% of GDP is related to housing in general. That is, purchases that are associated with the ownership of a home, buying furniture, going to Home Depot and buying paint or, things to improve your home, that type of stuff. So it's a big part of the economy. Same format here. You got your monthly data for 19, and then let's go to January 2020. It looks like there were 1,624,000 units started at an annual rate in January. Okay, so you divide this number by 12 if you want to know the actual January starts in the U.S. Okay, and take a look at the percentage change here. It's down 1.5%. This is from January 2020 to February 2020. So that's a 1.5% drop over that month. And then here you've got a 39% increase from February 19 to February 2020. That's a pretty big increase and a good sign of economic activity. The rule of thumb is you want housing starts to be between 1.5 to 2 million per annualized period. And it looks like in December we had that, but not for the prior months. Which kind of makes sense because the economic activity in housing has diminished due to the high prices in housing. But it looks like in January and even in February, based on the preliminary report, we're between that 1.5 to 2 million annualized range. So that's a healthy rate for the economy. If you go below that number, then it suggests that there might be a looming recession in housing. And if you go above 2 million, then it suggests that there might be a shortage of housing supplies, which means that there's so many houses being built that they're not going to be able to keep up with the demand. Scroll down to the next table, which is Table 4. This is units that are under construction at the end of the period. So we go to January, there were 1,205,000 homes under construction in that month. Again, not annualized. So that's the actual number of homes that are actively under construction by the end of January. And then let's scroll down to Table 5. And for this table, it shows the housing units completed. So for example, in January, there were 1,319,000 homes completed. This is an annualized rate, so it means you divide by 12 to get the actual monthly number. As far as other parts of these tables, you'll notice they do have not seasonally adjusted data. Not really relevant for us. Normally, if it's available, we use seasonally adjusted. Also, these numbers tend to be volatile month to month. So just be aware that a change in, let's say, housing starts, let's go back here. So housing starts went from 1,381,000 to 1,601,000 from November to December, which looks like a pretty big change. But that is not really telling because it's such a short period, and weather can even influence a lot of that. Despite their seasonal adjustments, which does try to consider weather, it's an imperfect science. So severe weather can definitely, even with adjustments, cause dramatic changes. It could cause a sudden drop or sudden improvement based on conditions. So just remember, when looking at data, a longer term period is probably better if you're trying to project onto the overall economy. And that's why up here, this illustration helps us see kind of an upward trend here in permits, starts, and completions, which is generally a good sign for the economy. So even though there's five tables in this overall report, the big three are Table 1, which gives us the building permits, Table 3, which gives us the housing starts, and Table 5, which gives us the housing completions. And that brings up the question of how long does this housing process take? Generally, it's around 3 months from permit to start, and then around 6 months from start to completion. So you've got usually an average of 9 months from the time the permit is issued to the unit actually being completed. Now that, of course, is going to vary based on the size. A single family home might take less time than a 200 unit high rise, but those are averages that give us a sense of the process. All right, that's it, guys. If you have any questions, let me know.